Text I received from my aunt on a Tuesday morning in November said 4 words, "Thinking of you, sweet girl." That was it. No context, no explanation. Just those 4 words from a woman I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years. A woman who lived in Tucson and made green chile casserole at every holiday and used to call me her favorite niece even though I was her only niece. I almost ignored it. I was running late for work. I had a deposition prep at 9 and a coffee that was getting cold on my desk, and my brain was already 3 steps ahead, running through exhibit lists and witness timelines. I set my phone face down and pulled up the case file. But something about it nagged at me. Thinking of you. Not, "Hey, how are you?" Not, "Miss you, let's catch up." Something about the tone felt off, soft in a way that felt careful. Like someone choosing words around a bruise. I picked my phone back up and typed, "That's sweet, Aunt Gloria. Everything okay?" She took 20 minutes to respond. I know because I kept checking. When the message came through, it wasn't a text. It was a voice memo, 47 seconds long. I put in my earbuds and pressed play, and I heard my aunt take a breath, the kind of breath you take before you say something hard, and then she said, "Honey, I just want you to know that whatever your parents have told people, I never believed it. I want you to know that. I've been thinking about you for months, and I didn't know if you were okay, and I needed to reach out. Please call me." I sat in my car in the parking garage of my office building for a long time after that. Whatever your parents have told people. I didn't call her right away. I couldn't. I had a deposition prep and a full calendar, and also my hands were shaking, and I didn't trust my voice to stay even. So I went inside. I did my job. I kept my face neutral through 4 hours of witness prep and a lunch I barely touched. And then I drove home at 6:30 and sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and called my Aunt Gloria. She answered on the first ring. "Oh, thank God," she said. "Thank God." And that's when I found out that for the better part of 18 months, my parents had been telling our extended family that I was mentally unwell. Not just struggling, unwell, in the clinical, serious, committed to a facility sense of the word. They told my aunt. They told my mother's 2 sisters. They told family friends who had known me since I was 7 years old. They told people at their church. They said I'd had a breakdown, that I'd become unstable and paranoid and had pushed everyone away, that I was in a treatment program somewhere in New Mexico and that contact from family members would only set back my progress. They told people not to reach out to me. They told people I'd asked for space. And because my parents were respected people in their community, because my father is a deacon and my mother volunteers at the food bank, and both of them have spent 30 years carefully constructing the image of a warm, stable Christian household, people believed them. Of course they did. Why would anyone lie about something like that? Let me back up. Because for any of this to make sense, you need to understand what the 18 months before that phone call looked like. I'm a paralegal. I've been doing it for 6 years, and I'm good at it. Organized, detail-oriented, hard to rattle. I was 28 when everything started unraveling. I had just gotten a promotion. I had a decent apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, a small but real savings account, and a relationship that was about 6 months old and going better than anything I'd had before. My parents had always been controlling. I want to be honest about that because I spent a long time softening it even to myself. I called it old-fashioned. I called it just how they are. But the truth is that my entire childhood was structured around making sure they were comfortable, around not making waves, around being the kind of daughter who reflected well on them. I was the good kid, the quiet kid, the kid who got good grades and went to church without arguing and didn't ask for much. When I moved to Charlotte at 23, my mother cried for 2 weeks. My father told me I was making a mistake. They called every day, sometimes twice. They had opinions about my apartment, my job, my friends, the man I briefly dated at 25 who they'd never even met but had decided was wrong for me based on his last name. I managed it. I got better at boundaries. Slowly, imperfectly, the way you do when you're learning in real time what a boundary even is. And then I started dating someone they really didn't like. His name is Theo. He grew up in Charlotte, went to NC State, manages a logistics team for a mid-sized company. He's steady and funny, and the kind of person who remembers what you said you were worried about 2 weeks ago and asks how it went. My parents' objections to him were never fully articulated. They never said anything specific. What they said was that he wasn't right for our family. What they said was that I was moving too fast. What they said, eventually, was that if I continued seeing him, I was choosing him over them. I said I wasn't choosing anyone. I said I wasn't choosing anyone. I said I was just living my life. The relationship with my parents deteriorated fast after that. My mother stopped returning my calls reliably. My father sent me a letter, an actual handwritten letter, telling me I was breaking the family apart. I tried to schedule a visit to talk things through. They canceled twice, then stopped responding to my attempts to rebook. After about 5 months of that, I did what my therapist had been gently suggesting for a while. I took a step back. I stopped chasing them. I told myself that when they were ready to have a real conversation, I would be there, but I wasn't going to keep knocking on a door that was deliberately staying shut. I thought I was handling it like an adult. I had no idea that during those same months while I was going to work and building a life and seeing Theo on weekends and thinking my family was just going through a rough patch, my parents were quietly rewriting the story. The version of events they told people was this: I had become unstable after a serious relationship ended badly. I had developed anxiety and paranoia. I had said things to them that were frightening. They had tried to get me help, but I had refused and pushed them away. Eventually, for everyone's safety, they had reached out to a treatment facility in New Mexico. I was there now. I was getting help. It was very sad. Please pray for me. None of that was true. Not a single word of it. I was in Charlotte. I was going to work. I was dating a good man and seeing a therapist voluntarily once a month for completely normal life transition stuff. I was fine. But no one in my family knew that because my parents had told them not to contact me, and because, here is the part that still makes me feel sick, my parents had access to an old email address of mine. One I'd used through college and still had linked to a secondary account I barely checked. At some point, they had gotten into that account. I still don't know exactly how. And using that account, they had sent several messages to family members, messages that sounded like me, messages written in my voice, close enough to fool people who hadn't spoken to me in a while, that said things like, I need space right now, I'm not in a good place, please don't reach out, I'll contact you when I'm ready. Those emails are why my aunt had gone quiet for 18 months instead of calling to check on me. Those emails are why, when she finally did reach out through a different channel, just a text to my real cell number, the one she'd always had, she thought she might be violating some boundary I'd set. I found all of this out on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my aunt's voice go careful and apologetic. And then, when she realized I truly did not know any of this, go very quiet. You didn't know, she said. It wasn't a question. I didn't know, I said. There was a long pause. Then she said, Baby, your father's birthday party is in 3 weeks. The whole family is coming. Your grandparents, your cousins, everyone. Your mother has already told people you won't be there because she's going to say you're still in treatment. I asked her not to say anything. I asked her to let my parents keep thinking she hadn't reached me, and then I started making plans. Here's what I want to say about the 3 weeks between that phone call and my father's birthday party. They were the most focused I have ever been in my life. I am a paralegal. I build cases for a living. I know how to document, how to organize, how to anticipate what someone is going to say and prepare for it. I put those skills to work. First, I contacted the email provider and formally reported unauthorized access to my old account. I documented the sent messages with timestamps. I saved everything, screenshots, headers, forwarded copies from family members who sent them back to me once I started quietly reaching out. I called 3 cousins and 2 of my mother's friends, people I had direct contact information for, and told them the truth. Not in an emotional, accusatory way. In a clear, factual, here is my phone number, call me if you want to verify way. I attached a photo of myself holding that day's newspaper to every single message. I'm not joking, I watched enough true crime to know that people need evidence. Two of the five called me back immediately. I also, and I want to be careful about how I say this because I'm not a lawyer and this isn't legal advice, I spoke with an attorney. An actual attorney who specializes in cybercrimes and identity fraud. Because accessing someone's email account without permission and using it to impersonate them, even an old account, even to family members, is not legal. It doesn't matter that they're your parents. It doesn't matter that no money changed hands. Unauthorized computer access is a federal offense under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and using someone's identity to send messages without their consent has its own set of statutes. I'm not telling you what I decided to do. I'm telling you what I found out. The party was at my parents' house in Greenville, South Carolina. Two-story colonial, the kind of house that looks warm and orderly from the outside, with a wreath on the door and flower boxes under the windows. I had grown up in that house. I knew exactly where they kept the spare key, ceramic frog by the back steps, still there. I checked on Google Maps Street View out of morbid curiosity. I drove down on a Saturday, alone. Theo offered to come and I said no, not because I didn't want him there, but because I needed this to be mine. I needed to walk into that house as myself, with no buffer, no backup, no one to hide behind or lean on. I needed them to see me standing on my own 2 feet in the middle of their living room and understand exactly what they had done. I got there at 6:45. The party had started at 6:45. The party had started at 6. I could hear it from the driveway, voices, music, the particular warm noise of a lot of people in a house. My father's 70th birthday, 70 years old. My grandfather had flown in from Orlando. My mother's whole side of the family was there. People who had gotten those emails in my name. People who had been told I was broken and away and unreachable. I rang the doorbell. My cousin answered. One of the two who had called me back. She knew I was coming. She had helped me plan this, actually, in the quiet way that a person helps when they're angry on your behalf. She opened the door and her eyes went wide even though she'd been expecting me, and she said, loud enough to carry, "Oh my God, is that Waverly?" Heads turned. My name is Waverly. It's an unusual name, and my parents gave it to me, and I have always loved it, which makes it particularly painful that it became the name attached to a lie. But in that moment, in that doorway, with my coat on and my chin up and the living room full of people going quiet one by one as they turned to look, I was glad to have a name that carried. My mother was across the room. She was holding a glass of wine and talking to someone from their church, and she turned like everyone else turned, and her face went through about 4 expressions in 2 seconds. I watched it happen. Surprise, then something almost like hope, then recognition. The recognition that something was very wrong, that I was not supposed to be here, that the story was unraveling in real time, and then she went pale. "Waverly," she said. The word came out strange. Flat. "Hi, Mom," I said. Surprise. My father came in from the kitchen. He was holding a plate of food and wearing the birthday sash my mother had bought him, and he stopped in the doorway to the dining room and stared at me, and I stared back at him, and neither of us said anything for what felt like a very long time. My grandfather spoke first. He's 81 years old and he flew in from Orlando, and he had been told, apparently, that his granddaughter was in a treatment facility in New Mexico, and when he saw me standing in his son's living room in a coat and boots, looking entirely healthy and entirely present, he put his hand on the arm of the person next to him to steady himself and said, "What in the world?" I crossed the room and hugged him first. He held on for a long time. Then I turned to face the room. Not dramatically. I wasn't there for theater, I was there for truth. And I said as calmly as I could manage, "I know a lot of you have been told I've been away. I'm not. I've been in Charlotte this whole time. I've been working and living my life. I found out about 3 weeks ago what my parents have been telling people, and I thought the best thing I could do was show up and let you see for yourselves." The room was very quiet. My mother said my name again, sharper this time. A warning. The same tone she'd used when I was 12 and said something at the dinner table that embarrassed her. I looked at her. "Mom, I'm not here to fight. I'm here because people who love me were lied to and they deserve to know the truth. What happened next was not a clean movie moment. Real life rarely is. There was confusion, and there were some people who didn't understand, and there were others who understood immediately and whose faces went through their own complicated journeys. My mother started crying, which was tactical. I recognized it as tactical because I had grown up watching her use tears as a redirect. My father put his plate down and said that this wasn't the place for this. My aunt, who had driven 4 hours to be there, said quietly and very clearly, "I think this is exactly the place." My cousin had her phone out, not to film anything, just to have it ready if it came to that. It didn't come to that. What it came to was this: my grandfather sitting down on the couch, looking stunned, my mother leaving the room, and my father and I standing in the middle of his birthday party, while 30 years of careful image management cracked open at the seams. I didn't yell. I had decided in advance that I wouldn't yell, partly because it wouldn't help, and partly because I knew that if I yelled, it would become the story. She showed up screaming. She really is unstable. I had thought about this the way I think about deposition prep: anticipate what they'll use and don't give it to them. What I gave them instead was documentation. I had printed copies in my bag: the unauthorized email access report, the messages sent from my account, the attorney's letter outlining potential legal exposure. I didn't hand them out like some kind of legal service. I just made clear they existed. My father, to his credit, or perhaps just to his shock, did not try to deny it. He didn't confirm it either. What he said was that things had gotten complicated and that they had been worried about me and that the situation had gotten out of hand. Out of hand. 18 months of telling people his daughter was institutionalized, sending emails in her name, cutting her off from her entire extended family. Out of hand. I said, "I understand you're going to frame this as coming from a place of concern. I want you to know that I don't accept that framing, and neither will the people who received those emails once they understand what happened. I'm not making any decisions tonight, but I need you to understand that I know everything, and there will be a conversation, and I'm going to choose the terms of it." Then I went and sat with my grandfather for 2 hours and ate birthday cake and talked to cousins I hadn't seen in 2 years. It's been 7 months since that night. My parents and I have not spoken. That is a choice I made, and I want to be honest that it is a choice I revisit constantly. Not because I doubt it, but because grief doesn't care how justified your decisions are. I grieve the parents I wanted them to be. I grieve the version of that house where I felt safe. That grief is real, and I'm not going to dress it up as something easier than it is. What I will say is this: my grandfather calls me every Sunday now. My aunt and I have had dinner twice. 3 of my cousins have reached out to say they're sorry they didn't push harder, didn't ask more questions, didn't trust their own instincts when something felt off. I tell them they have nothing to apologize for. My parents are very good at what they do. The email account issue is still with an attorney. I'm not going to tell you what I've decided to do with it. I'm still deciding. Theo was at my apartment when I got back from Greenville that night. He had made dinner and kept it warm and didn't ask a single question until I was ready, which took about 45 minutes and one very large glass of water. And when I told him everything, the whole night, start to finish, he just sat across the table from me and said, "I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I'm really glad you went." Me too. Here's what I've been thinking about in the months since. We talk a lot about toxic family dynamics in a kind of abstract way. Terms like narcissism and manipulation and enmeshment get thrown around so frequently that they start to lose their weight. But what happened to me wasn't abstract. My parents built something concrete. They told specific lies to specific people. They accessed an account. They coordinated a story. They did this deliberately over time because I had made a choice they didn't like, a choice about who I loved, and they decided the most effective response was to erase me. That's not a communication style. That's not a communication style. That's not something that happened because things got out of hand. If your family is doing something that requires other people's silence to sustain, if the story only holds up as long as you're not in the room, that is the thing to pay attention to. The story that can't survive your presence is the story that was never really about you. I drove back to Charlotte that night with the windows down even though it was November and cold because I needed the air. I needed to feel like I was moving through something real and open and mine. I had my name back. I had my story back. That's enough for now. I've thought a lot about why my parents did what they did, not in a searching, desperate way, not anymore, but in the quiet, honest way you think about something once the shock is worn off and you're just left with the facts of it. They did it because it was working. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. The controlling, the guilt, the pressure, all of it had worked for 28 years. I had been a good daughter. I had been quiet and careful and accommodating, and somewhere along the way they had learned that the cost of losing me was something they never had to pay. And then I changed. I built a life they didn't choose for me. I loved someone they didn't approve of. I stopped knocking on a door that kept shutting in my face, and they realized, maybe for the first time, that I might actually leave. So they erased me before I could. That's what I mean when I say actions have weight, not in some cosmic mystical sense, just in the plain human sense that every choice you make builds the next one. My parents spent 30 years building a version of our family that depended on my silence. Every time I smoothed things over, every time I swallowed something that deserved to be said, every time I called it just how they are, I was adding a brick to a wall that eventually trapped both of us. I don't say that to blame myself. I say it because understanding it is the only way to stop it. What I'm prouder of than anything, prouder than walking into that party, prouder than the documentation, prouder than the attorney's letter, is that I didn't become cruel. I had every reason to. I had been lied about, impersonated, cut off from people I loved. I could have walked into that room swinging. I could have made it ugly. And there was a part of me that wanted to badly in the way that you want to when someone has taken something from you and the anger is still fresh and hot. But I had spent 3 weeks thinking about what I actually wanted. And what I wanted wasn't destruction. What I wanted was to be seen. I wanted my grandfather to know I was alive and well. I wanted my cousins to know the truth. I wanted my parents to understand, clearly and without any room for reinterpretation, that I knew what they had done and I was not afraid of them. You can do all of that without screaming. Theo used to say that the most disciplined thing a person can do is choose how they show up in a hard moment. I used to think that was a little too tidy, the kind of thing that sounds better as advice than it feels as practice. I understand it differently now. Walking into that house calm, repaired, documented, clear, was the hardest thing I've done. It was also the thing I'm most glad I did exactly the way I did it. My grandfather calls me every Sunday. That is what I think about when I think about what courage actually costs and what it actually gives back. The story my parents told about me couldn't survive my presence. It turned out that was all I needed to know.